Welcome to the Self-Belief Podcast, where we talk with people who have great influence in the Metro Detroit business community. We discuss all aspects of their journey, including the moments where they've had to draw deeply on their self-belief to achieve their vision. I'm your host, Keith Baldwin, with my co-host, Jordana Chaffetz, sponsored by Regal Payments and JAC Digital, as well as our studio partner, Office Evolution of Troy. These conversations will potentially make you re-examine your beliefs about business, people, and life in general. Here's a taste of what's coming up today.
You can actually work on being more happy. I think that's part of our challenge as a society, is everyone's chasing happiness, and I don't know that that's possible. I think what you can do is chase fulfillment and chase service as best you can, which, again, I'm not perfect at. And when you do that, it's amazing how much joy and happiness it can bring to your life indirectly.
Let's explore and scrutinize together as we unlock the mind of today's guests to provide you with inspiration and tangible takeaways that you can choose to apply in your life. Today's guest is Tom Willis, co-founder of Phoenix Partners. Welcome, Tom.
Thanks, guys, for having me.
Hey, thanks for coming. Now, Tom, I know you received an engineering degree from Michigan, an MBA from Notre Dame, and being the co-founder of Phoenix Performance Partners, which is a leadership coaching company helping CEOs across many business sectors. That's correct?
Indeed it is.
Did I describe your business adequately?
Yeah, at the highest level, you nailed it.
All right, purposely. Now, this is the Self-Belief Podcast, and I noticed on your website the first line of your purpose statement is, "We strive for a day when people are freed from self-limiting beliefs, unleashing their unlimited potential." What do you think are some of the most common self-limiting beliefs out there?
Well, there's several, but probably the biggest is that I'm not enough. That we all have this critic in our head that's constantly chirping in our ear, constantly telling us that we're not good enough, we're not smart enough, we're not tall enough, handsome enough, rich enough, and it all really boils down to I'm not enough.
Why do you think that is? Why is that a common thing for a lot of us? I mean, I know I've had that before.
Same. It's hard being a business owner sometimes.
It's life can be hard, period. The probably the most common thing we hear from CEOs is that they feel like their job is lonely. And especially during COVID, it was especially lonely. And part of that's because most CEOs, if you really ask them, if you really get to know them, many of them do not believe that they belong in that position. Some of the best leaders that we meet are sort of reluctant CEOs. They got put in that position because they're so effective, not because they had some sort of ego to get there. And with that comes the imposter syndrome, which many people talk about. And my business partner's been doing this for 30 years now, over 30 years. And he'll tell you that 90% of CEOs will admit to having some form of imposter syndrome, and the other 10% are liars.
Right.
So I don't know why it is. It's probably just gets back to good and evil, good and bad. We just are constantly battling that in our own heads.
Right. Do you feel over the years that you've been doing this, the kind of ratio of people who have a lot of self-doubt as to the amount of people who have a lot of self-belief has kind of stayed the same? Or are more people experiencing self-doubt these days, or is it more people just more apt to talk about it?
Yeah, I think in many ways we've made a lot of progress because we're talking about a lot of this stuff more freely. I mean, I think back to my parents' generation, you just never heard these things talked about, right? Especially in sort of a machismo type of society. So in that regard, I think it's good. It's a lot more talk about it. Now, the flip side of that, the double-edged sword side of that, is that I think we're still wrestling with it. We still don't know fully what to do with it all the time. And layer on top of that quite frankly, I saw a great quote the other day that said, "We don't realize the lottery that we won by being born at this time." And in our case, in this amazing country. But because of that, we're so many of our basic needs are met, right? That we don't really have too many real struggles, many of us. I know I don't. Place to eat, food, all those sort of core things that motivated us. And so
Sure.
that leaves us complaining about things that probably aren't really worth complaining about.
Yeah.
How do you stop yourself from complaining about it?
How do I stop myself?
Yeah.
I don't. I just get better at noticing it and realizing that, oh, there I go again. It's not a bad thing. It's very human. It's very human to be this way. A lot of our work is frankly trying to normalize that these things happen for all of us. There's not like a good way to be and a bad way to be, which unfortunately a lot of the leadership consultants out there kind of unintentionally push. Like if you do these 10 things, then you're a good leader. And if you don't, the undertone is like you're a bad leader. Well, we don't quite subscribe to that. That's a little bit too simplistic and a little bit too like superhero-esque. The reality is we all do all 20 of those things. The trick is, am I becoming more and more conscious of when I'm defaulting to maybe non-productive behavior or non-productive thinking? And then am I able to shift over to a more productive way? So I'll give you a quick example. A few weeks ago, I was traveling. I've been to California 4 times, Nashville, Boston, Chicago, all within like 6 or 7 weeks.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, not ideal. And one morning I particularly was whining to myself about not wanting to go wherever I was going. And pretty quickly I noticed it. And pretty quickly I was able to coach myself to realize, well, but I get to go be of service to this amazing organization who's providing services to folks who are in wheelchairs and homebound. And like, what a blessing, what an absolute honor it is that I get paid to do this work. And so pretty quickly I was able to shift my thinking from whining and complaining to myself to focusing on the others that I get to help. And usually that works if you get focused on your purpose.
Now, I know your role is about going in, fixing cultures and enhancing things, and I think you talked just then about shifting your thinking. I know from kind of our interaction before today, you came out of college, a couple of prestigious colleges, Notre Dame, Michigan, and then you get a pretty fancy job at Price Waterhouse, and you're in your 20s, probably making decent money, probably got a little swagger in your step, and then all of a sudden you got let go, right?
Yeah,
that was kind of, how did you deal with that in your early 20s? You probably felt on top of the world, big ego, and then you got the pin in the balloon.
Got canned, yes. And my friends still give me a hard time about that because I wasn't even there for a year, and I literally didn't have one billable hour, which is everything in the consulting world. And it's because the .com explosion happened. Literally, the .com era just exploded, and so they let go of thousands of people. I just happened to be one of those. And it didn't feel good because, I worked my butt off through college. I'd gotten these great jobs. And I, just came back from 3 months of training down in Florida. So I was ready to go. And then, boom, a month or two later, get let go. So how did I deal with that? Was that your question?
Yeah. I mean, people coming out of college now, people being laid off. How did you deal with that? I know that you went out the country and decided to be more of service, but how did you get to that point?
Yeah, not well is probably the short answer at first. I was pretty depressed, frankly. I don't think I would have said I was depressed, but I think I was.
What age exactly was that?
I would have been like 23, I think.
Right.
Yeah.
So no fiance at the time, no family?
No, in fact, I'd just broken up with my girlfriend at the time.
It was all going wrong.
That didn't
It was all going wrong.
It was all headed south. Even on the surface, again, you're right, Keith. I was making good money. In fact, they gave me like 3 months severance, which was a joke. So I was going to the beach in Chicago every day playing volleyball. So in the surface, I was living the Facebook life, right? Like it looked great, but under the surface, I was quite miserable. And luckily, the best man at my wedding reached out and said, "Hey, why don't you come and hang out with me? I'm over in Africa. I need some help." And I was like, "Okay, let's do it." So I literally went to Tanzania, Africa, and helped teach at a school that he was helping to run because the person that was running the school unexpectedly died.
Wow.
And so my friend was sort of pushed into the leadership position and needed some help. And that was a life changer for sure.
What did your help look like? What were you doing there?
Teaching mostly, teaching Spanish, economics, even having some fun around like the United States and geography and the Great Lakes. And I taught them homes, the Great Lakes, Huron, Ontario, Michigan, Erie, and Superior.
Amazing. That's a really good acronym.
They loved that.
Yeah.
And that's why I loved it, because I'll never forget, I was teaching a lesson and I realized like these kids, had nothing of sort of substance of like material wealth in their life. It was one of only, I think, 3 high schools in the entire city of Dar es Salaam, which had millions of kids.
Wow.
So it shows you how few kids got the chance to even go to high school. And yet, these kids were kids. Like, it just didn't matter where you are in the world. Kids are kids. And I've always loved kids. And it was like, okay, I'm being called to do something more than just make money. So it was a huge life changer.
How long were you there for? And that was your first time in Africa?
It wasn't, my first, and I haven't been back since. Not very long. And I came back and pretty quickly found a teaching job, and the rest is sort of history. I did that. I was in the education world in Detroit specifically for about 15 years.
Yeah.
So going back just to Africa a little bit, so like what was your biggest takeaway from that experience?
Well, in retrospect, my biggest takeaway is that, if you want to live a life worth anything, to get focused on serving others, that you can actually work on being more happy. I think that's part of our challenge as a society, is everyone's chasing happiness, and I don't know that that's possible. I think what you can do is chase fulfillment and chase service as best you can, which again I'm not perfect at. And when you do that, it's amazing how much joy and happiness it can bring to your life indirectly. So that's probably at the time I wouldn't have said that. But in retrospect, I think that idea of like being of service is really important, and getting clear about what's my purpose in life. We've only got one life to live, and so what are we going to do with it?
Yeah, I think traveling and being in new environments is so important. Obviously, I got to travel and come over here and do different things. And do you want your kids to do something similar when they're in their early 20s without, the house and all the responsibilities for them to spread their wings?
Oh yeah. Do I want that intellectually? Absolutely, Keith. Do I want that emotionally? Absolutely not. My wife has some great friends from college, and one of them said to her friend, she's like, hey, those weird boys in college that were always calling their moms and like always going home on the weekends, and they're all like, yeah. She's like, I'm raising my boys to be that way. And I think all parents want their kids to live next door to them and sort of stay close to home, but I don't know if that's the most healthy thing in the world. I had amazing parents, and my dad especially pushed us to go and explore the world, and it's a huge gift.
Yeah. Now, I'm pretty interested in a lot of the work you do, on leadership and helping cultures, because one thing we talk with a lot of business owners is about the community and the cultures they create. But take me really quickly through those. You came back, you did 15 years of teaching. What did that look like? And then how did you transition into Phoenix Partners?
Yeah, I did not 15 years of teaching. I was actually, I don't have the patience that most teachers do. Teachers are saints. Most of them, especially middle school teachers, in my opinion. So I pretty quickly transitioned into administration and teaching, and then I went full time into more of the administrative side, doing technology and then operations, and then ultimately becoming the CEO or school superintendent for the last 5 years.
Oh, it's very cool.
It was cool. Yeah, I was only 34. When I started. So I was super excited. Super pumped about it, felt like I was ready, and completely terrified at the same time, because I really didn't know what I was doing. Even though I had my MBA from Notre Dame, there's nothing quite like the school of hard knocks and learning. So I love that. It was tough work. It really is. And I wasn't even really on the front lines. So my hat's off to lifelong teachers. I don't care what school district you work in. It's challenging everywhere, especially nowadays. I think so many of society's ills are kind of put on schools now, and schools are blamed for so many things that just aren't terribly rational. So towards the end of it, I really loved visiting other schools. I got to be a part of the Gates Foundation, some initiatives they were doing, and I got to visit schools in California and Texas and all over the country. And I realized something really interesting, which was that you could taste the school culture in about 15 seconds. You could walk into a school and tell pretty quickly like how this place was run, what the energy was, and how effective they were.
What were the key things when you walked in that you were getting sensory of this, that helped you form the opinion?
Yeah, it's a good question, Keith. I've never really thought about it too deeply. I think because that's why I said taste, because it's almost an instinct. It's almost like a third level, third sensory. But I suppose on the surface, it would just be everything you're taking in visually. Is this place well run? Is it clean? Are things orderly, organized? Does it feel like everything has a place? Do things work, or not? Is it well resourced? Is it not well resourced? Although that's not even terribly important, frankly. I went to many schools that were not well resourced, that were doing great work. What was the energy from the kids? Was there excitement in the air, or was it quiet? So it's a combination of all those factors that our brains are amazingly good at taking in quickly and making sense of.
One other question I had about the work, when you go in and you get a sense for that culture, what are some things, the first questions you ask as you go out to businesses and they want to talk to you about their culture?
Usually we start with, what's the big why? Why are you here? What's the purpose of your organization? What do you want to accomplish? What's your 50-year vision?
Right.
And you'd think in the nonprofit sector, the healthcare sector, the school sector, that those answers would be pretty crystal clear. And it's interesting that most of the time they're not. That we just kind of assume that we know why we're there. And to really dive deep is where the power is, because a lot of times you'll get like the superficial answer. Well, we're here for kids. Okay, but what does that mean? And specifically, how are you here for kids? How are you showing up for kids? What's your specific purpose? So that's typically where we start, and then we start to get into, okay, what challenges are you facing? What about your team? What challenges is the team facing? What are you proud of? What do you need to work on? And a lot of our questions are meant to help, again, normalize that wherever they are, there's nothing wrong. It's perfect. It is what it is. What are you going to do about it going forward as a leader? That's what matters.
Yeah. As you formulated those questions, was that coming back to that taste you got of being in schools? And I know you have a partner in Phoenix Partners. How did that school experience then translate to the inflection moment of leaving the schools and going into Phoenix Partners? How did that start?
Well, I remember going home to my wife and saying, hey, I think it's time for a change. And she said, yeah, I knew that about 6 months ago. And I thought, well, thanks for telling me. But our partners are pretty good at noticing those sorts of things. And I think part of it because I was just getting a little bit tired, but part of it was because I really wanted to help more schools. And interestingly enough, I didn't really have a methodology or a system for doing it. And so I kind of jumped before I had a parachute. Luckily, pretty quickly, I met my now business partner, Brad, and he'd been doing this work at the time for 25 years.
Wow.
And he was looking to get into help more schools, but he was not an educator. He did not have an education background like I did. So when we met, it was like the perfect combo of interests.
How'd you guys meet?
So a great story, actually. So Jennifer Granholm, our former governor of Michigan, her husband, Dan Mulhern, is a family friend. And so I called him and we were talking about maybe we would work together and do some things. But the reality was he was in Berkeley, California. I was still here in Michigan, and it just pragmatically probably wasn't going to work. But he said, you know what you should do, Tom? You should talk to one of the people I used to work with, Brad Zimmerman. And so he introduced us. So I had to
Amazing.
call Berkeley, California to get introduced to Brad, who lived in Berkeley, Michigan.
Oh, that's hilarious.
And we were literally about 2 miles apart.
Smart world. It's really a small world.
Yeah.
Phenomenally.
How do you feel about the perception out there of leadership work? Do you think there's a wrong perception out there of what it actually is?
I don't know if there's a wrong perception. I think that one of the more common perceptions out there is that I've been there, done that. You know, many executives have been to quote unquote leadership trainings. And so walking into our work, it's very common for people to be skeptical. Not cynical, that's different. You know, cynical is like, there's no point to do this. But skeptical is like, yeah, I've done this before. It was okay, but didn't really produce many results. And so our job is to just kind of accept that and to say, we get it, we get the skepticism, because a lot of this work doesn't produce real results, frankly. Doesn't produce pragmatic, tangible results. So that's usually what helps to get people on board, is that they realize that we actually make a promise to every CEO or every superintendent we work with to produce results. And those results depend on them and what they're trying to accomplish. And so when people learn that we're not just taking them through like a leadership journey and a dance and a training, but we're actually there to help produce results, usually that gets people's attention. It's different than what's out there.
So can you walk us through kind of like an example of like how you help a school with their leadership? Like, does it go through the students and the teachers and superintendent? How does that work?
Yeah, culture always starts at the top. The CEO, the school superintendent, the executive director, the president of a hospital. We work in all those industries, the CEO of an engineering firm. It really doesn't matter.
Sure.
Every industry thinks they're unique, and they're not, because they're all human businesses.
Right.
If you don't get that humans really are what you're in the business of, then you're probably not terribly effective at what you're doing, or you've got a culture that's sort of run by fear and people being afraid of getting fired, which is fine. That's your prerogative, but not the best way to sort of capitalize on human potential. So it always starts at the top. It always starts at the top of the organization because they are the font, they are the source of culture. And many times the leader, the president, the CEO doesn't realize that what frustrates them about their culture are the things that they're doing unconsciously.
Yes.
And so a lot of our work is helping them to realize, that the things that are upsetting you or frustrating you, might be coming from some of your behaviors. Again, not because you intentionally wake up thinking I'm gonna create a culture where people are constantly coming to me for answers, but our egos are all quite big and we like solving problems. And so if people come to us and we can solve problems, we feel good about it. But the flip side of that is that we get frustrated when people are constantly coming to us to solve their problems. So that's just one example of helping the CEO to kind of become more aware. Now, we always start with the team, the executive team. We don't do one-on-one coaching. Not because it's not good. It can be helpful, but it's not as productive. It's not as fruitful as taking an entire team through an experience. And so we always start with the executive team, usually 5, 6, 7 people, whatever the makeup is. And our approach is a 5-month, quite intense engagement, frankly.
And how do you, I know you mentioned you promise results. How can you make that promise? What are some of the stipulations in that promise?
Yeah, we do have some ground rules and we do have some basic understandings that, that we're all committed to, and we work on that right out of the gate. We do an orientation and talk about some of those things because we can't produce results unless the team is committed to growing and improving.
Agreed.
So that's always a sort of a starting point. And then we, about a month or two later, we'll go off and we'll do like an off-site 2.5-day retreat. Usually it's away from home. We've done it as far as Florida, Puerto Rico. We're still trying to get one in Hawaii. Haven't done that yet. And usually those 2.5 days are where the huge aha moments happen.
Can I just ask, how do you get them to really treat that as a retreat, or not just like we're going to Hawaii for 3 days? Because you kind of smirked when you mentioned Hawaii. It's
yes.
It sounds like, we're going for leadership training, but I'll see you in the bar at nighttime.
Yes. Well, part of the answer is because the conversations that we help teams have are quite intense. Not intense in a bad way, but are intense in like a different way. Like we've never really done this before. We've never really had these sorts of conversations before. I've never really had these sorts of insights about ourselves.
What would be a conversation that would be different to what they've had before?
So a lot of times you'll take like let's say a survey, okay, a 360 survey. And you'll go through it, you'll make some plans, and then you'll go and execute like some tactics. You'll like have 20 ideas, like, okay. Problem is, those are all treating the symptoms. They're treating the surface level issues, because that's where our brains go. We see a problem, we're like, I know we could fix that, we could do this.
Right.
As opposed to actually slowing the conversation down and diving deeper and deeper into it. Well, why is that happening though? What's causing that? What are you all doing that might be contributing to that?
That's so interesting.
And we go deeper and deeper and deeper, and we have these 11 cultural mindsets, we call them, that get to the root cause. Because if you can get to like the 1 or 2 root causes, then you've just fixed like 30 symptoms, right? We know this in many other areas like medical and healthcare, but we don't think about it from a leadership perspective. Like, what's the root cause here? So in the world of social services, healthcare, education, we're all very committed to being of service to other people, which is great. The flip side of that is that we tend to avoid things. We tend to try to sweep things on the rug or not have the conversations, and we avoid. And so part of what we're trying to do is help people to see, like, we got to stop avoiding things. We got to step up and we got to take personal responsibility for solving challenges as they come up. So it seems so simple, but if all of a sudden you go from a team that avoids things to a team that leans into things and deals with things as they come up, it's amazing the results that can come from that. And that's just one sort of small example.
Yeah. Do you help a lot of team members set goals? I get the feeling that you do. And talking about goals, I think what would be some tangible things you could give listeners of how they can set goals? What would be an easy way that some of our listeners who are feeling maybe they're just floating through things can nail down a few goals?
Yeah, so I'm going to take probably a slightly different tack to this, because a lot of people have like a specific, like, this is the way to do it, like do this SMART goal or use this system. I've actually come to believe that the system is almost irrelevant.
Okay.
Your commitment and your discipline for using it is what's missing. Because we'll start something, we'll try it, and then we blame the system for our lack of discipline. And then we go find it. This is just like, oh, this is the system. Yeah, this will definitely do it. And then we do that for a few months or even a year, and then it starts to wither in its effectiveness because we're not really committed to it. We don't have the discipline to like stick with something and follow through on it. I'm sure your audience is very bright. They don't need another tip on, setting goals. What we need is more discipline, in my opinion.
How do they strengthen that discipline? Because, gym membership, gyms are packed January, February, March, right? And then it peters out. Is it more... I think I heard something the other day. I did hear something the other day. Dolly Parton said our commitment to do something has to be greater than our fear of not doing it, or our fear of doing it. So how is it more scary not to achieve something than to achieve it is, I guess, a problem many people have because the discipline wanes.
It does, as does the motivation, right? There's a great quote from Zig Ziglar. He says that people complain that the effects of leadership or the effects of inspiration don't last very long, right? Motivation tends not to last very long, inspiration. He says that's true, but neither do the effects of taking a shower, but we recommend it every day.
Right.
I like that.
And so part of it is we have to constantly be re-inspiring ourselves to literally put inspiration into ourselves constantly. And different things work for different people. For me, I've got 3 little kids. I made a commitment about 3 or 4 years ago to work out 3 times a week. And that was it. That worked for me for a few reasons. One, because, it's important for me to be healthy because I want to see my grandkids someday. That's a huge motivator for me. And the other thing I realize is that we spend so much time making a decision, then making a decision, then making a decision over and over and over again. And we spend a lot of mental energy. It's exhausting to do that.
It's true.
And if we can just find areas in our lives where we just make the decision once, and that's it. So in my case, working out 3 times a week, there are days when I absolutely do not want to work out. But if it's the 7th day of the week and I've only worked out twice, I don't have to think about it. There's nothing to think about. I've already committed to doing it. I've already made the decision. There's nothing to think about. I don't have to want to do it. I'm just going to do it. Now, that takes a pretty good amount of discipline.
So how do you do
but
that?
But for me, it worked.
How do you get into that mindset? Like, say for me, say Junior first, I want to work out 5 times a week, or I want to walk my dog for 2 hours every day. How would you tell me to be able to do that?
Yeah, I think a lot of it goes back to Yoda, right? Don't try, just do. Arnold Schwarzenegger says the problem with people with working out is that people think. You can't think. You have to get up, work out, and then when you're done working out, then you can think. Now, obviously, he's a bit extreme, and he works out 7 days a week. But a lot of it gets down to whatever you commit to doing commit to doing it like it's your integrity,
Okay.
like your life depended on it. And ultimately, the greatest form of integrity is the promises we make to ourselves. So if you're going to try to work out, or if you're going to try to read more, or whatever it is, figure out what can you commit to and for what time frame, and not suffer a single exception. Treat it like it's gold. And too often we're like, well, I'm going to try to do this. Well, stop right there. That's not going to get you there. Trying, it's just not going to work. Now, that's not being judgmental, or that's not being mean. It's just slowing down and thinking. Don't let yourself try anything, because you're setting yourself up for failure. Slow down and think about, well, what if I just did, I read this one book called Habits. It wasn't very good, actually, but one of the key points was good, which was that he wanted to get in shape. And he said, I'm going to commit, like my life depended on it, to doing one push-up every day for the entire year.
Wow.
One push-up, right? That's kind of brilliant when you think about it. Who can't do one push-up every day? And that was his thinking. Now, a month later, he's doing 20 push-ups. And a month later after that, he's doing 20 sit-ups. A month later, he's running a mile. So he kept adding to it, but his only real commitment was the one push-up. And so set yourself up for success in whatever it is you're trying to do.
Yeah, definitely. New goals can seem hard and large, but if you break them up into small parts like that, something manageable, something even below what you can do, then it just gets you moving, gets you doing something. And I know, talking of something which may be a big idea and hard to do is writing a book, and that's something you're doing right now. And what made you take on that task, and what's your book about?
Yeah, it's actually a great example, Keith, because we talked about this for probably 5 years. We tried to write a book for 5 years.
Wow.
Notice the language, right?
Right.
Guess what happened in those 5 years? We did not write a book.
Right.
And then we realized, like, oh, we're doing the same thing that we coach people on. We need to commit to it, and then the book will get written. And so literally, we sat down and we both looked at each other in the eye and said, all right, we're going to write this book, whether it kills us or not. And we committed to it. And that was it. And then we went, oh no, we don't know what we're going to write about. Because our work is so experiential, it's hard to like put that in a book, right?
For sure.
Because it's part of the conversation and back and forth and the dialogue, and every client's different. You're kind of dancing and weaving. It's a dance. But the commitment is what mattered, because then we went to work. We figured out, okay, what do we have to do to write the book? We got to figure out what we're going to write about, and we got to find somebody that can help us. And all of a sudden, the pieces started to happen. But the declaring that we were going to write the book was the most important phase. You know, the point there is that that deadline, you know, that commitment can be a tremendous creative force. And so for those of us who are thinking about doing something, stop thinking about it. Make a decision. Either do it or don't, but stop hanging out in the middle ground.
Yeah. Yeah, it reminds me of that story. I think Jim Carrey, when he was going to try and be an actor, wrote himself like a $5 million check, imagining that's what would happen in the future. But it's a great story, and it worked out for him. But I wonder how many people trying to emulate that write themselves a $5 million check. I'm like, well, hopefully. I don't know. Like,
they're manifesting. They want it to happen.
Yeah.
So can you give us a little quick synopsis of your book and what it's about, and what can we expect, and maybe when it's coming out?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's called The Great Engagement, and it's actually the title is Great Resignation, which is obviously pretty popular. And then resignation is crossed out. Engagement, how CEOs create exceptional cultures. So it's based on 30 plus years of doing this work, pragmatic. It's not a theoretical book. It's like what we've tried, what we know works, based on working with thousands of CEOs and executives across the country, from Alaska to across the pond in England. We've done work. So, and it's basically walking folks through the approach that we take. So, very high level, talking about the cultural mindsets and sort of this idea of transformational leadership and what does that mean, to very pragmatic tools and helping people to unpack leadership from management, from coaching, because those three things get mixed together a lot and confused. But there are three very distinct tools in our toolkit, and the more we can get good at using them, it's like a carpenter. You know, you can use a hammer, you can use a saw, and you can use a screwdriver to cut a piece of wood, but one of those is probably going to be more effective.
For sure.
And so a lot of pragmatic tips about that. There's some stories in there, and then we also provide access to some of the tools that we use with clients. Like we have a 4-factor behavioral model that helps people to unpack their unconscious behavioral strategies. It's similar to like a DISC or a Myers-Briggs if folks have heard of those tools before. The difference is we built ours as a coaching tool, and our language is very specific. We think sometimes the tools that are out there get used to concretize behavior unintentionally. They get used to label people, and that's not healthy, especially as leaders. We don't get to be one way. We may default to some way, but we have to be able to be agile and to learn and to change and to grow.
Yeah. You talk about the 3 sections of leadership, management, and coaching. Be interested to see here how you define them. I mean, I've heard that, and I feel it's true, that you lead people and you manage things. How would you then, do you agree with that? And then how would you then define coaching and separate those 3?
Yeah, great question. I could spend 2 hours on this, Keith, so I'll try to give
all
you
in 2 minutes,
the short version. Leadership has to come first, is where I'd start. If you don't have a future, you got nothing else to work with.
Right.
So leadership is all about generating a view of the future that others take on as their future. So probably the most gifted leader of the last century is Dr. Martin Luther King. If you go and examine his speeches, they're unbelievable pieces of art. Because a lot of it is he's putting a future out there that people are like, oh yeah, I want that future. And that day and age, like that's pretty challenging, right? Pretty divisive. So leadership's all about putting out a future. Whether you call it vision, mission, purpose, BHAG, North Star, we don't particularly care. Some consultants get super fired up about those things are different. We actually don't think they are terribly different. They're all about the future. What's the future you're going for? So that's leadership. Then along comes management. Well, management is getting people to make promises to do things. Not because you made them, but because they want to. Which is why leadership is so important. Because if they don't want to, if they're not aspiring to it, then you can't get them to make promises.
Right.
That makes sense.
Unless you have a fear-based culture. So management is all about managing promises, not people. So in a way, I kind of agree with that idea that you can't manage people, you can manage things. I suppose the things would be agreements or promises. We use the word promises, by the way, because it kind of makes people pucker up a little bit and realize like, oh, this is serious. And then coaching is everything else. It's how to get to that future. So once you have the future out there with leadership, once you have agreements on getting things done and doing things and processes and procedures, then coaching is really everything else. It could be attending a conference. It could be asking open-ended questions. It could be getting curious. It could be having a dialogue. Could be reading a book. I mean, it's everything else that helps that person or that team move towards that future.
Yeah, I was curious as well, and when people call you in, how many people, or what percentage would have the foresight of actually they're doing really well and they just want you in to do even better? Or how many call you like the house is on fire, rock bottom, like if our company's falling apart, come fix us? Do you get both of those type of customers?
It's 95% are doing well, doing okay, doing good, and they feel stuck. They feel like they've plateaued maybe.
Okay.
Or maybe there's a new leader who's trying to bring in a new vision, and we can help accelerate that. Instead of it taking 5 years, we can help them do it in 5 months, and I mean that literally. Or it's like an accelerant.
Okay.
So those are probably the two most common scenarios.
How do you deal with I would have thought it'd be more than 5%, but how do you deal with those ones? Do you sometimes turn those people away, or you're able to fix some people there?
It depends. So if the CEO comes to us, because we only do the work if the CEO directly hires us.
Okay.
We don't work through HR. I mean, we will work through HR, but at the end of the day, the CEO has to hire us, because otherwise it won't work, and we're not interested in wasting our time or theirs.
Right.
If we get the sense that what they really want is for us to come in and help fix their team, and they're not a part of the journey, then we will say, thanks anyway, good luck.
That makes sense, because it starts from the top, as you said.
Exactly. But if they're committed and they're just so frustrated, they don't realize like what they're doing to create these challenges or or they've had lots of turnover and they're just struggling and they feel like they just need help, but they're committed to getting better, then yeah, we'll help them.
Yeah. What's been the biggest challenge for Phoenix Partners since you've been in it, and whether it be your personally or the business, and how have you navigated past it?
I think for us, it's probably how do we scale? How do we grow to be able to serve more organizations? We've got a very powerful team, but if we want to have like a 10x or 100x impact on the world, that's not easy. And finding really good, committed, purpose-driven folks is part of what we're wrestling with. Frankly, we want to get this book done, which it'll be out in January.
Amazing.
And then from there, we're looking at how do we scale the team. So we're always open to just talking to people, because it's not a job. We don't interview people. We just have a conversation, and if they're excited about it like we're excited about it, then we can talk about working together.
Yeah. One of my last questions for you as we wrap up, and you gave me some really good in-depth answers to my pre-interview questions and lots of key points. But one that just kind of stands out to me is you really focus on courage over fear. And as we talked about at the beginning with self-limiting beliefs and I'm not enough, the fear of failing, I guess. What does courage over fear mean to you, and how do you help people take that leap?
Yeah, so if you think about people who we label as brave or courageous, do they not see fear? Is fear not present for them?
It's true.
No, they see it, right? They see the fear. The difference is they just go right through it. They push through the fear. And that takes courage every single time. And that could be as big as, a new initiative in your organization that's going to cost millions of dollars, or it could be as quote unquote relatively small as having a more candid conversation with your teenage son or daughter, right? There's a fear that's like, oh, I don't know if I want to do this, but then you got to push through that with courage. And fundamentally, that's the nature of transformational leadership, is helping yourself and helping your people move from a fear mindset, because we all wake up, human beings, we wake up with fear. We don't have to nurture it. We don't have to journal and create a gratitude fear journal, right? No, it just happens. We need to nurture the other side of the equation. So Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who made famous the 7 stages of grief, she said that foundationally under all the other emotions, anger and joy and everything else, what do you suppose are the 2 foundational emotions under everything else? They're at the opposite ends of the spectrum. What do you suppose they are?
Courage and fear?
Fear's one, yeah. Courage is in the middle. Courage is how you move from fear to the other side. What do you suppose? Love.
Come on, Jen, help me
out. I was thinking about it. I was like, I don't know.
Love, and it's not like Valentine's Day love or, love between a husband and a wife. It's agape love. It's this idea of like being of service to others, putting the other person first. And really that's the essence of a powerful culture. And this isn't just airy-fairy. This is very pragmatic, if you think about it. Any business that's worth anything does this well. They don't put their needs first. They put the needs of the customer, and they provide value to the customer. That's a form of agape love.
And that's good customer service. And that's how a lot of businesses are still in business these days. I mean, you cannot operate from a place of fear. That never works. Like if you started your business, like if I was fearful for the last 6-7 years, I would never move forward. Sometimes you have to do stuff just because you have to do it for your business.
Yeah. Exactly. And it takes courage every single time. Even those who have mastered it still need that courage to move from fear to love.
So you're trying to say you still need it too, even though you've semi-mastered it?
No, I absolutely need it. Absolutely. Sometimes multiple times a day, Jordana. This is very human. That's why so much of the narrative out there is like, if you do these things, you're a good person or you're a good leader. Mm-hmm. And if you don't, you're a bad person or a bad leader. That's not helpful, and that's not realistic.
No.
The reality is we're all human beings, and we all do things that are very human. And we need to nurture that consciousness. We need to become aware of when we're serving ourselves and when we're serving others. We just did a retreat down in Nashville with a bunch of CEOs. We have this cool group called the Interchange. And it's a group of CEOs and superintendents from across the country that come together once a month. And a lot of what we talked about is just this. How do we nurture this every single day? How do we become more conscious of, oh my gosh, there I go again, fear is driving me.
That makes sense.
To how do I nurture a focus on others mentality?
And what sort of answers did you come up with?
The first step is just becoming aware of it. So it's really simple. One of the things we recommend to leaders is to, if you carry around a book or a laptop, just start noticing how often fear shows up, or how that critic in your head, that little voice in your head that's telling you that you're not good enough, or you didn't handle that well, or you did that badly. Just start noticing it, write it down. And within a couple weeks, you'll be shocked at how often this little bastard, the critic, shows up.
That's great advice.
And that's the first step, is just to become aware of it. Don't try to fix it. Don't try to make it go away. Just try to notice it. There's this great analogy in the healthcare world that we learned from them, that it's like driving a car, that the critic always wants to get you out of the driver's seat and take control of the wheel. And your job is to get the critic into the passenger seat or into the back seat. And if you're doing really well, like if you're really in flow, to get the critic in the trunk.
Wow.
But the reality is you'll never get it out of the car until maybe you're dead. I don't know. But it always shows up, and it's always there, and we just constantly have to remind ourselves, okay, thank you. And it's always bad, by the way. Sometimes the critic can be really helpful. Like, I was going to do a speech with a bunch of board members in California, and I was like anxious, and I don't get anxious very often. And all of a sudden I realized, like, oh, I'm not ready. Like, I have no idea what I'm going to talk about. I have no idea, like, what value I'm going to provide. And so the critic was really helpful, because it was like, Tom, wake up, go get to work, put something together.
For sure.
So it's not always a bad thing. It's just noticing it and then using it and engaging your prefrontal cortex, or your, what I like to call your inner coach, to then use that and make it more productive, as opposed to just spinning in the anxiety.
Yeah, I think that's great advice.
Very helpful.
And maybe lastly, just a takeaway for people, whether they're a CEO, whether they're a business owner, whether you maybe manage a team, or even if you just manage yourself, what's something that people can focus on to help them move forward and improve?
Well, I think probably the biggest thing is just slowing down. I'm a big believer that if we want to hurry up as leaders, we need to slow down. And that could take on different forms for different people. There's a great book out there called The Rhythm of Life, and one of the lines in there really resonated for me. It said, we can learn more in an hour of silence than we can in a year of reading books.
Wow.
And there's actually some, as I understand, I'm not a brain scientist, but as I understand it, how it's been explained to me, is that our prefrontal cortex has access to about 2 linear feet of data, okay? But our unconscious mind, sort of our more limbic system, has access to about 10 football fields, or 10 soccer pitches, football pitches of data. And, like, think about that. A couple linear feet, 10 football fields.
So are you talking about meditating, or just silence, or just go
or
for
going
a
to a
walk in the
monastery?
woods? Yeah.
It could be any of that stuff. It's just silence. It's just slowing down. For me, it's prayer. Frankly, Mother Teresa had someone asked her, like, what did she pray about when she was alive? And she said, nothing, I just listen. And they said, oh, that's interesting. What does God say? She said, nothing, he just listens.
Wow.
And it's why we have these aha moments in our life. We're taking a shower, we're going out for a walk, and all of a sudden we're like, bing, like this idea pops in our head. And it's because we're letting that unconscious mind, that 10 football fields of amazingness that's in our heads, go to work and connect dots that we've never connected before, and let the neurons make connections we've never seen before. So if you want to grow and expand and make a better team and a better culture, start with yourself, and start with slowing down and giving yourself the gift of silence.
Yeah, I mean, and kind of a last spin-off on this, and just made me think, and I don't want to go off on a long tangent, but, with my kids, sometimes my son, he wants my phone in the back of the car because he's bored, or my daughter's she's not crazy on social media, but she's scanning through stuff. And I'm like to myself, when I was your age, I didn't have anything in the back of the car. I looked out the window. But, I like looking out the window. I wasn't bored. I mean, sometimes I was bored. But at the same time, that's the silence. That's where your imagination runs. And I think that is kind of an issue without sounding like an old fuddy-duddy. It's like... There's not enough silence. There's not enough downtime, I don't think.
But what would you say to the people who have a hard time, being silent? They always want to chat. And if they're CEO, they're every second of their day, they're just busy. And it's just they're just doing busy work. What would you say to those people?
Something they probably don't want to hear. But it depends on the person. It depends on my relationship with them.
Sure.
But frankly, a lot of times it's because we're all trying to fill this unfillable hole.
Yeah.
And it gets back to where we started, which is that we're not enough. But if I stay really busy, then I don't have to think about those sorts of things.
Very true.
I don't have to face who I am in this world because I'm so busy. I just learned that busy comes from a Dutch English word, bezieg, that roughly approximates the word anxiety. So think about that. It's fascinating, right? What do we say a lot of times in our society?
We're so busy, but
We're so busy.
That's it. Honestly, I feel especially being busy is just, you could be doing anything being busy. You have to say okay, I'm doing this, this, and this. Because when I hear people say, I'm just busy, I'm okay, but what are you actually doing?
Yes. Yeah, and a lot of times people don't even know, well, I'm so busy, I can't keep track of that. But it's kind of hilarious when you think about it. We're all running around, and it's like a point of pride. We're basically saying, how you doing? Oh, my gosh, I'm so anxious.
Yeah.
So anxious. Look at me, how amazing I am. I'm so anxious. So I've actually been trying to replace that with, my life is full or my life is fulfilling. I still say busy sometimes, but I'm trying to say it less because it's not really what I mean, and it's not really a productive way to live, frankly, is to just be
100%.
running from one thing to another. And it's an impossible thing to do all the time. I don't do it all the time. But I'm striving for it. Every day I'm trying to get better at it and become more and more conscious.
Well, Tom, really appreciate your time. Looking forward to your book coming out. And really appreciate you sharing a lot of knowledge with us. And I will definitely take time later tonight to have some silence.
Thank you for joining us. It was great. And we're excited to have your book come out in January.
Yes, thank you, Jordana. Thank you, Keith, for having me on.
Thank you. Thanks, Tom. Good seeing you.
Keith.
Jordana. Let's get to the heart of the matter. Tom, very interesting guest, I felt.
He was very interesting. I think that he honestly gave really good, tangible tips. And I love what he was saying about being busy because everybody's busy, but it's the way you say it and it's the way you feel about something. His leadership tips were amazing. I like how he was you have to start from the top. If you don't start from the top, it's really hard to fix a team.
Yeah. When he mentioned busy, it made me think of our interview with Ken, and something I try and do is things with intention, and Ken mentioned intention. So it's okay if you're, rather than saying busy, time is occupied with activities of intention.
Yes.
But it's when your time is occupied with, I'm just trying to catch a breath, I'm over here, I'm over there, that's when I think you need to take a beat and really strategize and prioritize.
Exactly, and I think that we've learned a lot. Again, today's episode, as you said, you have to create that culture in your workplace, and that's so key to all our other episodes.
Yeah, and I think it was good to hear and be reaffirmed that everyone has that self-doubt, even the top CEOs. And their little joke was that 90% admit it and 10% are in denial.
Yes.
So it's, you're not alone out there. We all have that little voice on our shoulder saying that being overly critical, I guess. Is
exactly, and as you said, also another really good point was you have to operate with courage, not fear.
Right. And then he was talking about being moving on the spectrum from fear to love,
yes.
And nudging it forward that way.
Yes, exactly. I love that he gave us some rapid fire in our own podcast.
That's right. Where are you on that spectrum, Jordana?
I don't know. I really hope I have a lot of courage. I really try.
Yeah. Yeah, well, courage is in the middle, right? You got to keep moving to that service place, that place of service.
Well, today was a wonderful episode, and I cannot wait for our next episode. So this will be airing soon. Yeah,
and we hope to bring you more and more content that is focused on leadership, is focused on being able to take that next step. Now, Tom was specifically involved in the industry of helping leadership, but with all our guests, I think there's been some great takeaways with leadership as well.
Yes, our aim is really to provide you guys tangible tips. So anyways, guys, thank you so much for listening. We'd love for you to rate us on Spotify and Apple to help us increase our views and increase getting on some top lists.
Yep, and you can reach us on social media, and you can always email at hosts@selfbeliefpodcast.com.
Thank you for listening.
Thanks.
Does the idea and managing your social media intimidate you? Are you not seeing the results you'd like? Do you struggle to find the time that social media requires? At Jack Digital, we're happy to be the solution to all your social media needs. We work collaboratively with you and listen to your goals. We focus on building your brand and helping you create a personal connection with your audience. From social media consulting to customized social media strategies, we are here to help you have less stress and more results. And at the end of the day, enjoy your social media.
As a business owner, if the answer to the question, who does your credit card processing, is just, I'm not sure, or at my bank, I think, then you are obviously not receiving the royal treatment you deserve. Regal Payments helps businesses accept payments in the most efficient and cost-effective ways possible. And at Regal, we treat you like royalty. And in a good way, we're not going to chop off your head or write crazy stories about you in the tabloids. Think of Regal Payments like the King's Butler. We'll be catering to all you and your royal subjects' needs to get the best payment experience possible. Contact Regal today to see how we may help you and serve you. RegalPayments.com or Keith@RegalPayments.com.